Hello, my name is Roger Trudeau Leblanc. Now, we never know how God will use us in His divine providence to accomplish His will, but we do know His providence in how things unfold. And God used my mother to save the life of Pope John Paul II through a series of events that led up to the day that he was shot. Now, in honor of my mother's memory, I've added her maiden name, Trudeau, to my books and to my other works. She's depicted in the photo on the right. Now, my mother had been leading pilgrimages to Rome twice a year since 1970, and in advance of her trips, Cardinal Medeiros of Boston would write to the Vatican to arrange for a group pass to the papal audience that would be waiting for her upon her arrival. And in all the years she went to Rome, she never took her copy of the Cardinal's letter, except for her last trip before she died. Now, as the car began to leave for the airport, she made them stop. I remember the look on her face. Something impelled her to get out of the car and get her copy. And in light of the events that took place while she was in Rome, upon her return to Boston, we asked her what impelled her to get a copy of the Cardinal's letter. And she could only respond by saying she didn't know, except that she knew she couldn't leave without that copy of the letter. But divine providence would make it crystal clear why she needed her copy the day the Holy Father was shot. When she arrived in Rome, she was surprised to learn that the original letter from Cardinal Medeiros had never arrived at the Vatican. So in like manner, this was the first and the only time that the Cardinal's letter had never arrived to arrange for her group pass in all the years that she had gone. But fortunately she had her copy, which was acknowledged by Vatican personnel, and they decided to give my mother and her group a place along the fence where the Holy Father would be driving by. So this would make it possible for the pilgrims to touch his hand, which my mother and my aunt and some of her group did as well. Now, I mentioned my aunt. My aunt was a retired nurse, and she handled men who had trauma from World War II, so she could handle men quite well. And she would accompany my mother on some of her trips, and she was there this day. Now, when my mother went in with her group to take their place, a man had snuck in with her group, and this man made his way to the fence and stood between my mother and my aunt. And as one might expect, the people in her group became upset. And so my mother turned and looked at the man and felt uneasy about him. Couldn't explain why, but she felt uneasy about him. And rather than letting the situation get out of hand, she leaned over to my aunt, who was on the other side of him, and said, "Louise, get him out of here." So my aunt happily acquiesced, spun him around, and punched him in the chest. And in a tapestry of Italian, she said things to him, not knowing whether he could speak Italian or not, but she spoke to him in Italian and chased him back into the crowd and made sure that he wasn't coming back. So after he had gone back into the crowd, the Holy Father had arrived where my mother was standing, and this man that my mother had just sent back shot over the heads of pilgrims as the Holy Father went by. It was Alianka, the man who shot the Pope. Now, had he not been moved back, my mother touched the Holy Father's hands, my aunt as well. He was standing between them. He would have had point-blank range on the Holy Father. It would have been over that day, and history would be different today. And my mother also told us when she returned that when Adka took his shots, there was a little nun standing next to him, and she went for his legs to make a tackle when he took the shots, and he went down when the crowds moved in on him. And he could have shot her, but if you mess with the nuns, he went down, and from what I was told, they practically had to tear her off of him. He wasn't going to get a second chance. And the next day, the Vatican cited this little nun for bravery. Now, if my mother's pilgrimage did not unfold as it did, beginning with her need to get her copy of the Cardinal's letter never arriving, my mother and her group being given a place against the railing, where the Pope would drive by, whereas normally they would not have been given that spot. Ali Adka sneaking in with my mother's group, where his opportunity for a point-blank range was taken from him, rather than getting in with some other group where he might have ended up with point-blank range. All of this shows the amazing providence of God, where he used a saintly, humble housewife to thwart the designs of evil men and demons who tried to take out the Pope. Now, my mother was pretty intimidated by the press when she returned, but I was there when Tom Ellis from WCVB, Channel 5 in Boston, was at her home interviewing her. I've posted the link to one of the articles about all of this on my website, which is CatholicSeries.com. CatholicSeries.com. When you arrive at my website, there will be a link that says, quote, "An encounter that saved the life of Pope John Paul II. Click here." There will be a link in that article that will take you to a newspaper article that headlines, "Local Woman Moves Suspect Just Before Pope Shot." And all of this has special significance to me for another reason. When I was a boy, my favorite film was Our Lady of Fatima. How could I have known so many years ago that in God's plan, through Our Lady of Fatima, who told the children of Fatima that the Holy Father would suffer, that she had my mother in mind in her plan to save the life of the Holy Father that day. And a year after the Holy Father was shot, he would go to Fatima and have one of the bullets that went through him placed in her crown, thanking her for saving his life. And all of this tells me that God can use any of us to accomplish his will in spite of the designs of men. You know, it's been said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Well, even if you don't tell him your plans, the exacting justice of God will not be lost on those who have evil designs. And thinking on what took place in the case of my mother, I saw more clearly how it is that all Catholics are called to defend the Church and her teachings in whatever way is available to us. So this is why I've written a series of books which you'll find at CatholicSeries.com. God bless.